The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 12 continued. The origin of the Satanic myth. Let us then fathom this creation of the patristic fancy still deeper, and find its prototype with the pagans. The origin of the Satanic myth is easy to trace. The tradition of the dragon and the sun is echoed in every part of the world, both in its civilized and semi-savage regions. It took rise in the whisperings about secret initiations among the profane and was established universally through the once universal heliolaterous religion. There was a time when the four parts of the world were covered with the temples sacred to the sun and the dragon, but the cult is now preserved mostly in China and the Buddhist countries. Bel and the dragon being uniformly coupled together, and the priest of the Ophite religion as uniformly assuming the name of his god. From Archaeology of Volume 25, page 220, London. In the religions of the past, it is in Egypt we have to seek for its Western origin. The Ophites adopted their rites from Hermes Trismegistus, and heliolaterous worship crossed over with its sun gods into the land of the pharaohs from India. In the gods of Stonehenge we recognize the divinities of Delphi and Babylon, and in those of the latter the devas of the Vedic nations. Bel and the dragon, Apollo and Python, Krishna and Kaliya, Osiris and Typhon are all one under many names, the latest of which are Michael and the red dragon, and Saint George and his dragon, as Michael is one as God, or his double, for terrestrial purposes, and is one of the Elohim, the fighting angel. He is thus simply a permutation of Jehovah. Whatever the cosmic or astronomical event that first gave rise to the allegory of the War of Heaven, its earthly origin has to be sought in the temples of the initiation and archaic crypts. The following are the proofs. We find A. The priests assuming the name of the gods they served. B. The dragons held throughout all antiquity as the symbols of immortality and wisdom, of secret knowledge and of eternity. And C. The hierophants of Egypt, of Babylon and India, styling themselves generally the sons of the dragon and serpents. Thus the teachings of the secret doctrine are thereby corroborated. There were numerous catacombs in Egypt and Chaldea, some of them of a very vast extent. The most renowned of them were the subterranean crypts of Thebes and Memphis. The former, beginning on the western side of the Nile, extended towards the Libyan desert, and were known as the Serpents' Catacombs, or passages. It was there that were performed the sacred mysteries of the Kuklus Anarchis, the unavoidable cycle, more generally known as the circle of necessity, the inexorable doom imposed upon every soul after the bodily death and when it has been judged in the Amentian region. In the Bourbourge book, Wotan, the Mexican demigod, in narrating his expedition, describes a subterranean passage which ran underground and terminated at the root of the heavens, adding that this passage was a snake's hole, un agujero de culebra, and that he was admitted to it because he was himself a son of the snakes, or a serpent. From Diephanesier 70. This is indeed very suggestive, for his description of the snake's hole is that of the ancient Egyptian crypt, as above mentioned. The hierophants, moreover, of Egypt as of Babylon, generally styled themselves as the sons of the serpent god or sons of the dragon during the mysteries. The Assyrian priest bore always the name of his god, says Movers. The Druids of the Celto-Britannic regions also called themselves snakes. "I am a serpent, I am a druid," they exclaimed. The Egyptian Karnak is a twin brother to the Karnak of Bretagne, the latter Karnak meaning the serpent's mount. The Dracontia once covered the surface of the globe, and these temples were sacred to the dragon only because it was the symbol of the sun, which, in its turn, was the symbol of the highest god, the Phoenician Elon or Elion, whom Abraham recognized as El Elyon. Note: see Sunconiaton in Eusebius. End of note. Besides the surname of serpents, they were called the builders, the architects, for the immense grandeur of their temples and monuments was such that even now the pulverized remains of them frighten the mathematical calculations of our modern engineers, says Taliesin. Note, in Society of Antiquaries of London, volume 25, page 220, end of note. De Beaubourg hints that the chiefs of the name of Wotan, the Quetzalcoatl, or serpent deity of the Mexicans, are the descendants of Ham and Canaan. I am Hivim, they say. Being a Hivim, I am the great race of the dragon snake. I am a snake myself, for I am Hivim. Cartas 51, and Isis Unveiled, volume 1, page 553 et sequens. Furthermore, the war in heaven is shown in one of its significations to have meant and referred to those terrible struggles in store for the candidate of adeptship between himself and his by magic personified human passions, when the inner enlightened man had to either slay them or fail. In the former case he became the dragon slayer, as having happily overcome all the temptations, and the son of the serpent, and the serpent himself having cast off his old skin and being born in a new body, becoming a son of wisdom and immortality in eternity. See Part 2 on the Satanic myth. Seth, the reputed forefather of Israel, is only a Jewish travesty of Hermes, the god of wisdom, also called Tot, Tat, Set, Thit, and Satan. He is also Typhon, the same as Apophis, the dragon slain by Horus, for Typhon was also called Set. He is simply the dark side of Osiris, his brother, as Angra Mainui is the black shadow of Ahura Mazda. Terrestrially, all these allegories were connected with the trials of adeptship and initiation. Astronomically, they referred to the solar and lunar eclipses, the mythical explanations of which we find to this day in India and Ceylon, where anyone can study the allegorical narrative and traditions which have remained unchanged for many thousands of years. Rahu, mythologically, is a Daitya, a giant, a demigod, the lower part of whose body ended in a dragon or serpent's tail. During the churning of the ocean, when the gods produced Amrita, the water of immortality, he stole some of it, and drinking became immortal. The sun and moon, who had detected him in his theft, denounced him to Vishnu, who placed him in the stellar spheres, the upper portion of his body representing the dragon's head, and the lower, Ketu, the dragon's tail, the two being the ascending and descending nodes. Since then, Rahu wreaks his vengeance on the sun and moon by occasionally swallowing them. But this fable had another mystic meaning, since Rahu, the dragon's head, played a prominent part in the mysteries of the sun's vikartanas, initiation, when the candidate and the dragon had a supreme fight. The case of the rishis, the abodes of Tiresias and the Greek seers, were modeled on those of the Nagras, the Hindu king snakes, who dwelled in cavities of the rocks under the ground. From Sesha, the thousand-headed serpent on which Vishnu rests, down to Python, the dragon-serpent oracle, all point to the secret meaning of the myth. In India we find the fact mentioned in the earliest Puranas. The children of Surasha are the mighty dragons, the Vayu Purana replacing Surasa of Vishnu Purana by Danayas or Danavas, the descendants of Danu by the sage Kashyapa, and those Danavas being the giants or titans who warred against the gods. They are thus shown identical with the dragons and serpents of wisdom. By simply comparing the sun gods of every country, one may find their allegories agreeing perfectly with one another. And the more the allegorical symbol is occult, the more its corresponding symbol in other systems agrees with it. Thus, if from three systems widely differing from each other in appearance, the old Aryan, the ancient Greek, and the modern Christian schemes, we select several sun gods and dragons at random, these will be found copied from each other. Let us take Agni, the fire god, Indra, the firmament, and Kartikeya from the Hindus, the Greek Apollo, and Mikael, the angel of the sun, the first of the aeons called by the Gnostics the Savior, and proceed in order. 1. Agni, the fire god, is called in the Rig Veda Vaishvanara. Now Vaishvanara is a Davana, a giant demon, whose daughters Puluma and Kalaka are the mothers of numberless Danavas, 30 millions, by Kashyapa, and live in Hiryanyapura, the golden city floating in the air. Notes. Notum Vaisvanara. He is thus named and included in the list of Danavas in Vinyu Purana. The commentator of Bhagavata Purana calls him a son of Danu, but the name means also spirit of humanity. And note on Kashyapa. Kashyapa is called the son of Brahma, and is the self-born to whom a great part of the work of creation is attributed. He is one of the 7 rishis, exoterically the son of Mariki, the son of Brahma, while Atharva Veda says the self-born Kashyapa sprang from time, and esoterically time and space are forms of the one incognizable deity. As in Aditya, Indra is son of Kashyapa, as also Vaivasvatamanu, our progenitor. In the instance given in the text, he is Kashyapa, Aditya, the sun, and the sun god, from whom all the cosmic demons, dragons, nagas, serpent or snake gods, and Danavas, the giants, are born. The meaning of the allegories given above is purely astronomical and cosmical, but will serve to prove the identity of all. End of note. Therefore Indra is, in a fashion, the stepson of these two as a son of Kashyapa. And Kashyapa is, in this sense, identical with Agni, the fire god, or sun, Kashyapa Aditya. To this same group belongs Skanda, or Kartikeya, god of war, the 6-faced planet Mars, astronomically, a Kumara, or virgin youth, born of Agni, for the purpose of destroying Taraka, the Danava demon, the grandson of Kashyapa by Hiranyaksha, his son, whose, Taraka's, yogi austerities were so extraordinary that they became formidable to the gods, who feared such a rival in power. Notes. All such stories differ in the exoteric texts. In the Mahabharata, Kartikeya, the 6-faced Mars, is the son of Rudra or Shiva, self-born without a mother, from the seed of Shiva, cast into the fire. But Kartikeya is generally called Agnibu, fireborn. Hiranyaksha is the ruler or king of the 5th region of Patala, a snake god. The Elohim also feared the knowledge of good and evil for Adam, and therefore are shown as expelling him from Eden or killing him spiritually. End of notes. While Indra, the bright god of the firmament, kills Vritra or Ahi, the serpent demon, for which feat he is called Vritrahan, the destroyer of Vritra, he also leads the hosts of Devas, angels or gods, against other gods who rebel against Brahma, for which he is entitled Yishnu, leader of the celestial host. Kartikeya is found bearing the same titles. For killing Taraka, the Danava, he is Tarakajit, vanquisher of Taraka. Kumaragua, the mysterious virgin youth, Siddhasena, the leader of the Siddhas, and Saktidhara, spearholder. Note, the story told is that Taraka, called also Kalabana, owing to his extraordinary yoga powers, had obtained all the divine knowledge of yoga vidya and occult powers of the gods who conspired against him. Here we see the, quote, obedient, unquote, host of archangels or minor gods conspiring against the future fallen angels, whom Enoch accuses of the great crime of disclosing to the world all the secret things done in heaven. It is Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Sergiel, and Uriel who denounced to the Lord God those of their brethren who were said to have pried into the divine mysteries and taught them to men. By this means they themselves escaped a like punishment. Michael was commissioned to fight the dragon, and so was Kartikeya, and under the same circumstances. Both are leaders of the celestial hosts, both virgins, both leaders of saints, spearholders, Saktidhara, etc., etc. Kartikeya is the original of Michael and Saint George, as surely as Indra is the prototype of Kartikeya. End of note. 2. Now take Apollo, the Grecian sun god, and by comparing the mythical accounts given of him, see whether he does not answer both to Indra, Kartikeya, and even Kashyapa Aditya, and at the same time to Michael, as the angelic form of Jehovah, the angel of the sun, who is like and one with God. Later ingenious interpretations for monotheistic purposes, elevated though they be into not to be questioned church dogmas, prove nothing except the abuse of human authority and power, perhaps. Apollo is Helios, the sun, Phoebus Apollo, the light of life and of the world, who arises out of the golden-winged cup, the sun. Hence he is the sun god par excellence. Note, the life and the light of the material physical world, the delight of the senses, not of the soul. Apollo is preeminently the human god, the god of emotional, pomp-loving, and theatrical church ritualism, with lights and music. End of note. At the moment of his birth, he asks for his bow to kill Python, the demon dragon, who attacked his mother before his birth, and whom he is divinely commissioned to destroy, like Kartikeya, who is born for the purpose of killing Taraka, the too holy and wise demon. Note, see chapter 12 in Revelation, where we find Apollo's mother persecuted by that Python, the red dragon, who is also Porphyrion, the scarlet or red Titan. End of note. Apollo is born on a sidereal island called Asteria, the Golden Star Island, the earth which floats in the air, which is the Hindu golden Hiranyapura. He is called the pure, Agnos, Agnus Dei, the Indian Agni, as Dr. Kinnelly thinks. And in the primal myth he is exempt from all sensual love. Book of God, page 88. He is therefore a Kumara, like Kartikeya, and as Indra was in his earlier life and biographies. Python, moreover, the red dragon, connects Apollo with Michael, who fights the apocalyptic dragon who wants to attack the woman in childbirth. See Revelation 12, as Python attacks Apollo's mother. Can anyone fail to see the identity? Had W.E. Gladstone, who prides himself on his Greek scholarship and understanding of the spirit of Hermes' allegories, ever had a real inkling of the esoteric meaning of the Iliad and Odyssey, he would have understood St. John's Revelation, and even the Pentateuch, better than he does. For the way to the Bible lies through Hermes, Bel and Homer, and the way to these is through the Hindu and Caldean religious symbols. The repetition of this archaic tradition is found in chapter 12 of St. John's Revelations, and come from the Babylonian legends without the smallest doubt, though the Babylonian story had its origin in the allegories of the Aryans. The fragment read by the late George Smith, see the Chaldean account of Genesis, page 304, is sufficient to disclose the source of the 12th chapter of the Apocalypse. Here it is as given by the eminent Assyriologist. Quote, our fragment refers to the creation of mankind called Adam. As the man in the Bible, he is made perfect, but afterwards joins with the dragon of the deep, the animal of Tiamat, the spirit of chaos, and offends against his God, who curses him and calls down on his head all the evils and troubles of humanity. Unquote. Note, no God who curses his supposed own work because he has made it imperfect can be the one infinite absolute wisdom, whether called Bel or Jehovah. End of note. This is followed by a war between the dragon and the powers of evil, or chaos on one side, and the gods on the other. The gods have weapons forged for them, and Merodach, the archangel Michael in Revelation, undertakes to lead the heavenly hosts against the dragons. The war, which is described with the spirit, ends, of course, in the triumph of the principles of good. Unquote. And notes, in the Indian allegory of Tarakamaya, the war between the gods and the Asuras, headed by Soma, the moon, the king of plants, it is Vishvakarma, the artificer of the gods, who forges, like Vulcan, Tubal-Cain, their weapons for them. We have said elsewhere that the woman with child of Revelation, chapter 12, was Aimi, the great mother, or Bina, the third Sephiroth, whose name is Jehovah. And the dragon who seeks to devour her coming child, the universe, is the dragon of absolute wisdom, that wisdom which, recognizing the non-separateness of the universe and everything in it from the absolute all, sees in it no better than the great illusion, Mahamaya, hence the cause of misery and suffering. End of notes. This war of gods with the powers of the deep refers also, in its last and terrestrial application, to the struggle between the Aryan adepts of the nascent fifth race and the sorcerers of Atlantis, the demons of the deep, the islanders surrounded with water who disappeared in the deluge. See the last pages of Volume 1 in Isis Unveiled, Atlantis. The symbols of the dragons and war in heaven have, as already stated, more than one significance, religious, astronomical, and geological events being included in the one common allegory. But it had also a cosmological meaning. In India, the dragon story is repeated in one of its forms in the battles of Indra with Vritra. In the Vedas, this Ahi Vritra is referred to as the demon of drought, the terrible hot wind. Indra is shown to be constantly at war with him, and with the help of his thunder and lightning, the god compels Ahivritra to pour down in rain on earth, and then slays him. Hence, Indra is called the Vritrahan, or the slayer of Ritra, as Michael is called the conqueror and slayer of the dragon. Both these enemies are then the old dragon precipitated into the depths of the earth, in this one sense. The Zendavestic Amshaspens are a host with a leader like Saint Michael over them, and seem identical with the legions of heaven when one reads the Vendidad. Thus in Fargod 19, chapter 2, verses 13 and 42, Zarathustra is told by Ahura Mazda to invoke the Ameshaspenta who rule over the 7 Karshvares of the earth, which Karshvares in their 7 applications refer equally to the 7 spheres of our planetary chain, to the 7 planets, the 7 heavens, etc., according to whether the sense is applied to a physical, supramundane, or simply a sidereal world. Note, the 7 Karshvares of the earth, the 7 spheres of our planetary chain, the 7 worlds also mentioned in the Rig Veda are fully referred to elsewhere. There are 6 Rayamsi, worlds above Prithivi, the earth, or this, Idam, as opposed to that which is yonder, the 6 globes on the 3 other planes. See Rig Veda 1, verse 34, and 3, 56, 7, 10,411, and 5, 60 and 6. See subsection on chronology. End of note. In the same Fargod 2 and 3, in his invocation against Angra, Mainyu, and his host, Zarathustra appeals to them in these words, quote, I invoke the 7 bright Zravach with their sons and their flocks, unquote. 42 Vendidad Sada. The Srava, a word which the Orientalists have given up as one of unknown meaning, means the same Amshaspens, but in their highest occult meaning. The Srava are the noumenoi of the phenomenal Amshaspens, the souls or spirits of those manifested powers, and their sons and their flock refers to the planetary angels and their sidereal flock of stars and constellations. Amshaspend is the exoteric term used in terrestrial combinations and affairs only. Zarathustra addresses Ahura Mazda constantly as thou, the maker of the material world. Ormazd is the father of our earth, Spenta Almighty, and she is referred to when personified as the fair daughter of Ahura Mazda. See Fargod 19, verse 2, who is also the creator of the tree of occult and spiritual knowledge and wisdom, from which the mystic and mysterious charisma is taken. But the occult name of the bright god was never pronounced outside the temple. Samael, or Satan, the seducing serpent of Genesis, and one of the primeval angels who rebelled, is the name of the red dragon. He is the angel of death, the Talmud saying that the angel of death and Satan are the same, and killed by Michael, he is once more killed by Saint George, who is also a dragon slayer. But see the transformations of this. Samuel is identical with the Simum, the hot wind of the desert, or again with the Vedic demon of drought, as Vritra. Simun is called Atabutos, or Diabolos, the devil. Typhon, or the dragon Apophis, the accuser in the Book of the Dead, is worsted by Horus, who pierces his opponent's head with a spear, and Typhon is the all-destroying wind of the desert, the rebellious element that throws everything into confusion. As Set, he is the darkness of night, the murderer of Osiris, who is the light of day and the sun. Archaeology demonstrates that Horus is identical with Anubis, whose effigy was discovered upon an Egyptian monument with a cuirass and a spear, like Michael and St. George. Note, verse 62, chapter 17 in the Book of the Dead. Anubis is Horus, who melts in him who is eyeless. End of note. Anubis is also represented as slaying a dragon that has the head and tail of a serpent. See Le Noir du Dragon de Metz. Cosmologically, then, all the dragons and serpents conquered by their slayers are, in their origin, the turbulent, confused principles in chaos, brought to order by the sun gods or creative powers. In the Book of the Dead, those principles are called the sons of rebellion. See also Egyptian Pantheon, pages 20 and 23. Quote, in that night, the oppressor, the murderer of Osiris, otherwise called the deceiving serpent, in verse 54, calls the sons of rebellion in air, and when they arrive to the east of heavens, then there is war in heaven and in the entire world. Unquote. From verse 49, Book of the Dead, chapter 17. In the Scandinavian Eddas, the war of those Ases with the Hrimtruses, frost giants, and of Asatur with the Jotuns, the serpents and dragons, and the, quote, wolf, unquote, who comes out of, quote, darkness, unquote, is the repetition of the same myth. The, quote, evil spirits, unquote, having begun by being simply the emblems of chaos, became euhemerized by the superstition of the rabble until they have finally won the right of citizenship in the most civilized and learned races of this globe, since its creation, as alleged, and became a dogma with Christians. Note, these evil spirits can by no means be identified with Satan or the great dragon. They are the elementals generated or begotten by ignorance, cosmic and human passions, or chaos. End of note. As George Smith has it, the evil principles, spirits, emblems of chaos in Chaldea and Assyria, as in Egypt we see, resist this change and make war on the moon. The eldest son of Bel, drawing over to their side the sun, Venus, and the atmospheric god Vul. See Assyrian Discoveries, page 403. This is only another version of the Hindu war in heaven between Soma, the moon, and the gods, Indra being the atmospheric Vul, which shows it plainly to be both a cosmogonical and an astronomical allegory woven into and drawn from the earliest theogony as taught in the mysteries. It is in the religious doctrines of the Gnostics that the real meaning of the dragon, the serpent, the goat, and all those symbols of powers now called evil can be seen the best, as it is they who divulged the esoteric nature of the Jewish substitute for Ein Sof in their teachings, of the true meaning of which, while the rabbins concealed it, the Christians, with a few exceptions, knew nothing. Surely Jesus of Nazareth would have hardly advised his apostles to show themselves as wise as the serpent had the latter been a symbol of the evil one. Nor would the Ophites, the learned Egyptian Gnostics of the Brotherhood of the Serpent, have reverenced a living snake in their ceremonies as the emblem of wisdom, the divine Sophia, and a type of the all-good, not the all-bad, were that reptile so closely connected with Satan. The fact is that even as a common ophidian it has ever been a dual symbol, and as a dragon it had never been anything else than a symbol of the manifested deity in its great wisdom. The Draco Volans, the flying dragon of the early painters, may be an exaggerated picture of the real extinct antediluvian animal, but those who have faith in the occult teachings believe that in the days of old there were such creatures as flying dragons or a kind of pterodactyl, and that it is those gigantic winged lizards that served as the prototypes for the seraph of Moses in his great brazen serpent. Note, see Numbers 21, verse 8 to 9. God orders Moses to build a brazen serpent, seraph, to look upon which heals those bitten by the fiery serpents. The latter were the seraphim, each one of which, as Isaiah shows in chapter 6, verse 2, had 6 wings. They are the symbols of Jehovah and of all the other demiurgi, who produce out of themselves 6 sons or likenesses, 7 with their creator. Thus the brazen serpent is Jehovah, the chief of the fiery serpents. And yet, in the 2nd of Kings 18, it is shown that King Hezekiah, who, like as David his father, did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, break in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made, and call it Nehushtan, or a piece of brass. End of note. The Jews had worshipped the latter idol themselves, but after religious reforms brought about by Hezekiah, turned round and called that symbol of the great or higher God of every other nation a devil, and their own usurper the one God. Note: and Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel in Chronologies 21, verse 1. The anger of the Lord Jehovah was kindled against Israel, and he moved David to say, "Go, number Israel," in the 2nd of Samuel, chapter 14, verse 1. The two are then identical. End of note. The appellation Satan, in Hebrew Satan, an adversary, from the verb shatana, to be adverse, to persecute, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all the other gods, Jehovah, not to the serpent, which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom, and is at the worst, even in the dogma, the adversary of men. This dogma, based as it is on chapter 3 of Genesis, is as illogical and unjust as it is paradoxical. For who was the first to create that original and henceforward universal tempter of man? The woman. Not the serpent, surely, but the Lord God himself, who, saying, "It is not good that the man should be alone," made woman and brought her unto the man. Verses 18 to 22. If the unpleasant little incident that followed was, and is still, to be regarded as the original sin, then it exhibits the Creator's divine foresight in a poor light indeed. It would have been far better for the first Adam of chapter 1 to have been left either male and female, or alone. It is the Lord God, evidently, who was the real cause of all the mischief, the agent provocateur, and the serpent only a prototype of Azazel, the scapegoat for the sin of the God of Israel, the poor Tragos having to pay the penalty for his master's and Creator's blunder. This, of course, is addressed only to those who accept the opening events of the drama of humanity in Genesis in their dead-letter sense. Those who read them esoterically are not reduced to fanciful speculations and hypotheses. They know how to read the symbolism therein contained, and cannot err. There is at present no need to touch upon the mystic and manifold meaning of the name Jehovah in its abstract sense, one independent of the deity falsely called by that name. It was a blind created purposely by the rabbins, a secret preserved by them with tenfold care after the Christians had despoiled them of this God name, which was their own property. Note: dozens of the most erudite writers have sifted thoroughly the various meanings of the name Jehovah, with and without the Masoretic points, and shown their multifarious bearings. The best of such works is the Source of Measures, the Hebrew-Egyptian mystery. End of note. But the following statement is made: the personage who is named in the first 4 chapters of Genesis variously as God, the Lord God, and Lord simply, is not one and the same person. Certainly it is not Jehovah. There are 3 distinct classes or groups of the Elohim called Sephiroth in the Kabbalah, Jehovah appearing only in chapter 4, in the first verse of which he is named Cain, and in the last transformed into mankind, male and female, Yahweh. Note: in the above-mentioned work, page 233, appendix, verse 26 of the 4th chapter of Genesis is correctly translated, "The men began to call themselves Jehovah," but less correctly explained, perhaps, as the last word ought to be written Jah, male, Hova, female, to show that from that time the race of distinctly separate man and woman began. End of note. The, quote, serpent, unquote, moreover, is not Satan, but the bright angel, one of the Elohim clothed in radiance and glory, who, promising the woman that if they ate of the forbidden fruit, ye shall not surely die, kept his promise, and made man immortal in his incorruptible nature. He is the Yao of the mysteries, the chief of the androgyne creators of men. Chapter 3 contains esoterically the withdrawal of the veil of ignorance that closed the perceptions of the angelic man made in the image of the boneless gods, and the opening of his consciousness to his real nature, thus showing the bright angel, Lucifer, in the light of a giver of immortality and as the enlightener, while the real fall into generation and matter is so to be sought in chapter 4. There Jehovah Cain, the male part of Adam, the dual man, having separated himself from Eve, creates in her Abel, the first natural woman, Abel, and sheds the virgin blood. Note: see for explanation the excellent pages of Appendix 7 of the same work. End of note. Now Cain, being shown identical with Jehovah on the authority of the correct reading of verse 1 in chapter 4 of Genesis in the original Hebrew text, and the rabbins teaching that Cain, the evil, was the son of Eve by Samuel, the devil who took Adam's place, and the Talmud adding that the evil spirit, Satan, and Samuel, the angel of death, are the same. Baba Batra 16a. It became easy to see that Jehovah, mankind, or Jehovah, and Satan, therefore the tempting serpent, are one and the same in every particular. There is no devil, no evil outside mankind to produce a devil. Evil is a necessity in and one of the supporters of the manifested universe. It is a necessity for progress and evolution, as night is necessary for the production of day, and death for that of life, that man may live forever. Satan represents metaphysically simply the reverse or the polar opposite of everything in nature. Note: in demonology, Satan is the leader of the opposition in hell, the monarch of which was Beelzebub. He belongs to the fifth kind or class of demons, of which there are 9 according to medieval demonology, and he is at the head of witches and sorcerers. But see in the text the true meaning of Baphomet, the goat-headed Satan, one with Azazel, the scapegoat of Israel. Nature is the god Pan. End of note. He is the adversary, allegorically, the murderer, and the great enemy of all, because there is nothing in the whole universe that has not 2 sides, the reverses of the same medal. But in that case, light, goodness, beauty, etc. may be called Satan with as much propriety as the devil, since they are the adversaries of darkness, badness, and ugliness. And now the philosophy and the rationale of certain early Christian sects, called heretical and viewed as the abomination of the times, will become more comprehensible. We may understand how it was that the sect of Satanians became to be degraded and were anathematized without any hope of vindication in a future day, since they kept their tenets secret. How, on the same principle, the Cainites came to be degraded, and even the Judas Iscariots, the true character of the treacherous, having never been correctly presented before the tribunal of humanity. As a direct consequence, the tenets of the Gnostic sects also became clear. Each of these sects were founded by an initiate, while their tenets were based on the correct knowledge of the symbolism of every nation. Thus it becomes comprehensible why Ildabaut was regarded by most of them as the god of Moses, and was held as a proud, ambitious, and impure spirit, who had abused his power by usurping the place of the highest god, though he was no better, and in some respects far worse, than his brethren Elohim, the latter representing the all-embracing manifested deity only in their collectivity, since they were the fashioners of the first differentiations of the primary cosmic substance for the creation of the phenomenal universe. Therefore Jehovah was called by the Gnostics the creator of, and one with the Ophiomorphos, the serpent, Satan, or evil. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 184. They taught that Yurbu and Adonai were names of Jehovah, who is an emanation of Ildabaut, from Codex Nazareus. See Part 2, The Fallen Angels. This amounted in their language to saying what the rabbins expressed in a more veiled way by stating that Cain had been generated by Samuel, or Satan. The fallen angels are made in every ancient system the prototypes of fallen men allegorically, and those men themselves esoterically. Thus the Elohim of the hour of creation became the Beni Elohim, the sons of God, among whom is Satan in the Semitic traditions. War in heaven between Threatauna and Azidahaka, the destroying serpent, ends on earth, according to Bernuf, in the battle of pious men against the power of evil, of the Iranians with the Aryan Brahmins of India. And the conflict of the gods with the Asuras is repeated in the Great War, the Mahabharata. In the latest religion of all, Christianity, all the combatants, gods and demons, adversaries in both the camps, are now transformed into dragons and satans, simply in order to connect evil, personified with the serpent of Genesis, and thus prove the new dogma. Note: read for further details upon the Satanic myth, Part 2 on symbolism, in this volume. End of note. Noah was a Kabir, hence he must have been a demon. It matters little whether it's Isis or Ceres, the Kabiria, or again the Kabiri, who have taught men agriculture. But it is very important to prevent fanatics from monopolizing all the facts in history and legend, and from fathering their distortions of truth, history and legend upon one man. Noah is either a myth, along with the others, or one whose legend was built upon the Kabirian or Titanic tradition, as taught in Samthres. He has therefore no claim to be monopolized by either Jew or Christian. If, as Faber tried to demonstrate at such cost of learning and research, Noah is an Atlantean and a Titan, and his family are the Kabiri or pious Titans, etc., then biblical chronology falls by its own weight, and along with it all the patriarchs, the antediluvian and pre-Atlantean Titans. As now discovered and proven, Cain is Mars, the god of power and generation, and of the first sexual bloodshed. Note: as he is also Vulcan or Vulcain, the greatest god with the late Egyptians, and the greatest Kabir. The god of time was Kum in Egypt, or Saturn or Set, and Tum is the same as Cain. End of note. Tubal-Cain is a Kabir, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, or, if this will please better, he is one with the Hephaestus or Vulcan. Jabal is taken from the Kabiri, instructors in agriculture, such as have cattle, and Jubal is the father of all those who handle the harp, he or they who fabricated the harp for Kronos and the trident for Poseidon. Note: see Strabo, comparing them to the Cyclops, 14 page 653 and following. End of note. The history or, quote, fables, unquote, about the mysterious Telchines, fables echoing each and all the archaic events of our esoteric teachings, furnish us with a key to the origin of Cain's genealogy in Genesis chapter 3. They give the reason why the Roman Catholic Church identifies the accursed blood of Cain and Ham with sorcery and makes it responsible for the deluge. Were not the Telchines, it is argued, the mysterious ironworkers of Rhodes? They, who were the first to raise statues to the gods, furnished them with weapons and men with magic arts. And is it not they who were destroyed by deluge at the command of Zeus, as the Cainites were by that of Jehovah? The Telchines are simply the Kabiri and the Titans in another form. They are the Atlanteans also, like Lemnos and Samthres, says Descartes. Rhodes, the birthplace of the Telchines, is an island of volcanic formation. See Genii of Fire, page 271. The island of Rhodes emerged suddenly out of the seas after having been previously engulfed by the ocean, say the traditions. Like Samthres of the Kabiri, it is connected in the memory of men with the flood legends. As enough has been said on this subject, however, it may be left for the present. But we may add a few more words about Noah, the Jewish representative of nearly every pagan god in one or another character. The Homeric songs contain, poetized, all the later fables about the patriarchs, who are all sidereal, cosmic, and numerical symbols and signs. The attempt to disconnect the two genealogies, those of Seth and Cain, and the further attempt as futile to show them real, historical men, has only led to more serious inquiries into the history of the past and to discoveries which have damaged forever the supposed revelation. Note: nothing could be more awkward and childish, we say, than the fruitless attempt to disconnect the genealogies of Cain and of Seth, or to conceal the identity of names under a different spelling. Thus Cain has a son Enoch, and Seth a son Enoch also. Enos, Karnok, Hanok. One may do what one likes with the Hebrew unvoweled names. In the Cainite line, Enoch begets Irad, Irad Mehujael, the latter Methusael, and Methusael Lamech. In the Society line, Enoch begets Canaan, and this one Mahalel, a variation on Mehujael, who gives birth to Jarad, or Irad, Jarad to Enoch, number 3, who produces Methuselah from Methusael, and finally Lamech closes the list. Now all these are symbols, Kabbalistically, of solar and lunar years, of astronomical periods, and of physiological, phallic functions, just as in any other pagan symbolical creed. This has been proven by a number of writers. End of note. For instance, the identity of Noah and Melchizedek being established, the further identity of Melchizedek of Father Sadik with Kronos Saturn is proved also. That it is so may be easily demonstrated. It is not denied by any of the Christian writers. Bryant, see Analysis of Ancient Mythology, Volume 2, page 760, concurs with all those who are of opinion that Siddiq, or Sadik, was the patriarch Noah, as also Melchizedek, and that the name by which he is called, or Sadik, corresponds to the character given of him in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. He was Sadik, a just man, and perfect in his generation. All science and every useful art were attributed to him, and through his sons transmitted to posterity. See New Encyclopedia by Abraham Rees, FRS. Now it is Sankoniaton who informs the world that the Kabiri were the sons of Siddiq or Zedek, Melchizedek. True enough, this information having descended to us through Eusebius in Preparatorio Evangelica may be regarded with a certain amount of suspicion, as it is more than likely that he dealt with Sankoniaton's works as he has with Maneto's synchronistic tables. But let us suppose that the identification of Siddiq, Kronos, or Saturn with Noah and Melchizedek is based on one of the Eusebian pious hypotheses. Let us accept it as such, along with Noah's characteristic as a just man and his supposed duplicate, the mysterious Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the high God, after his own order. See Hebrews chapter 5, verse 6, and 7, verse 1 et sequens. And, finally, having seen what they all were spiritually, astronomically, physically, and cosmically, let us now see what they have become rabbinically and Kabbalistically. Speaking of Adam, Cain, Mars, etc. as personifications, we find the author of the Source of Measures enunciating our very esoteric teachings in his Kabbalistic researches. Thus he says, quote, "Now Mars was the lord of birth and of death, of generation and destruction, of plowing, of building, of sculpture or stone-cutting, of architecture, in fine, of all arts. He was the primeval principle, disintegrating into the modification of two opposites for production. Astronomically, too, he held the birthplace of the day and year, the place of its increase of strength, Aries, and likewise the place of its death, Scorpio." Note: the alien name of Mars was Ares, and the Greek Ares is a name over the etymological significance of which philologists and Indianists, Greek and Sanskrit scholars have vainly worked to this day. Very strangely, Max Müller connects both the names Mars and Hades with the Sanskrit root Mar, whence he traces their derivation, and from which, he says, the name of Maruts, the storm gods, comes. Welke, however, offers more correct etymologies. See Griechische Götterlehre, Volume 1, page 415. However it may be, etymologies of roots and words alone will never yield the esoteric meaning fully, though they may help to useful guesses. End of note. He held the house of Venus, and that of the Scorpion. He, as birth, was good, as death was evil. As good he was light, as bad he was night. As good he was man, as bad he was woman. He held the cardinal points, and as Cain, or Vulcan, or Partasadic, or Melchizedek, he was lord of the ecliptic, or balance, or line of adjustment, and therefore was the just one. Note: as the same author shows, the very name Vulcan appears in the reading for the first words of chapter 4 in Genesis 5, is to be found Velekan, or Vulcan, agreeably to the deepened U-sound of the letter vowel. Out of its immediate context, it may be read as the god Cain or Vulcan. If, however, anything is wanting to confirm the Cain-Vulcan idea, Fürst says, Cain, the iron point of a lance, a smith, blacksmith, inventor of sharp iron tools and smith work, on page 278. End of note. The ancients held to there being 7 planets or great gods, growing out of 8, and Pater Sadic, the just or right one, was lord of the 8th, which was Mater Terra. See submerged, page 186-70. This makes their functions plain enough after they had been degraded, and establishes the identity. The Noachian deluge, as described in its dead letter and within the period of biblical chronology, having been shown to have never existed, the pious but very arbitrary supposition of Bishop Cumberland has but to follow that deluge into the land of fiction. Indeed, it seems rather fanciful to any impartial observer to be told that there were 2 distinct races of Kabiri, the first consisting of Hamad Mirzaim, whom he conceives to be Jupiter, and Dionysus of Menasias. The second of the children of Shem are the Kabir of Sokonistan, while their father Sidik is consequently the scriptural Shem. The Kabirim, the mighty ones, are identical with our primeval Giancochans, with the corporeal and the incorporeal Pitris, and with all the rulers and instructors of the primeval races, which are referred to as the gods and kings of the divine dynasties. The oldest Persian traditions about the polar and the submerged continents. Legendary lore could not distort facts so effectually as to reduce them to unrecognizable shape. Between the traditions of Egypt and Greece on the one hand, and Persia on the other, a country ever at war with the former, there is too great a similarity of figures and numbers to allow such coincidence to be due to simple chance. This was well proven by B.E. Let us pause for a moment to examine these traditions from every available source, to compare the better those of the Magi with the so-called Grecian fables. Those legends have now passed into popular tales, the folklore of Persia, as many real fiction has found its way into our universal history. The stories of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table are also fairy tales to all appearance, yet they are based on facts, and pertain to the history of England. Why should not the folklore of Iran be part and parcel of the history and the prehistoric events of Atlantis? That folklore says as follows. Before the creation of Adam, 2 races lived and succeeded each other on earth. The Devs, who reigned 7,000 years, and the Perish, the Izeds, who reigned but 2,000 during the existence of the former. The Devs were giants, strong and wicked. The Perish were small in stature, but wiser and kinder. Here we recognize the Atlantean giants and the Aryans, or the Rakshasas of the Ramayana, and the children of Bharatavarsha, or India. the ante and the post-diluvians of the Bible. Gyan, or rather Gnan, true or called wisdom and knowledge, also called Jan ben Gyan, or wisdom, son of wisdom, was the king of the Peris. Note, some derive the word from Paras, which produced Pars, Persia, Pars. But it may be equally derived from Pitar or Pitris, the Hindu progenitors of the fifth race, the fathers of wisdom or the sons of will and yoga, who were called Pitar, as were the divine Pitars of the first race. End of note. He had a shield as famous as that of Achilles, only instead of serving against an enemy in war, it served as a protection against black magic, the sorcery of the devs. Gyan ben Gyan had reigned 2,000 years when Iblis, the devil, was permitted by God to defeat the Deus and scatter them to the other end of the world. Even the magic shield, which produced on the principles of astrology destroyed charms, enchantments, and bad spells, could not prevail against Iblis, who was an agent of fate or karma. Note, see for these traditions the collection of Persian legends in Russian, Georgian, Armenian, and Persian. Eberlo's narrative Legends Persanes, Bibliothèque Orientale, page 298, 387, etc., and D'Envie's Memoir. We give in a condensed narrative that which is scattered in hundreds of volumes in European and Asiatic languages, as well as in oral traditions. End of note. They count 10 kings in their last metropolis called Khanum, and make the 10th, Kaimurath, identical with the Hebrew Adam. These kings answer to the 10 antediluvian generations of kings as given by Berosus. Distorted as those legends are now found, one can hardly fail to identify them with the Chaldean, Egyptian, Greek, and even Hebrew traditions. The latter, disdaining in its exclusiveness to speak of pre-Adamite nations, yet allows these to be clearly inferred by sending out Cain, one of the 2 only living men on earth, into the land of Nod, where he gets married and builds a city, in Genesis chapter 4, etc. Now, if we compare the 9,000 years mentioned by the Persian tales with the 9,000 years which Plato declared had passed since the submersion of the last Atlantis, a very strange fact is made apparent, he remarked, but distorted it by his interpretation. The secret doctrine may restore the figures to their true meaning. First of all, we read in Critias that one must remember that 9,000 years have elapsed since the War of the Nations, which lived above and outside the Pillars of Hercules, and those which peopled the lands on this side. Unquote from Critias. In Timaeus, Plato says the same. The secret doctrine declaring that most of the later islander Atlanteans perished in the interval between 850,000 and 700,000 years ago, and that the Aryans were 200,000 years old when the first great, quote, island, unquote, or continent was submerged. There hardly seems any reconciliation possible between the figures, but there is, in truth. Plato, being an initiate, had to use the veiled language of the sanctuary, and so had the Magi of Chaldea and Persia, through whose exoteric revelations the Persian legends were preserved and passed to posterity. Thus one finds the Hebrews calling a week 7 days and a week of years, when each of its days represents 360 solar years, and the whole week is 2,520 years, in fact. They had a sabbatical week, a sabbatical year, etc., etc., and their Sabbath lasted indifferently 24 hours or 24,000 years in their secret calculations of the sods. We of the present time call an age a century. They of Plato's day, the initiated writers at any rate, meant by a millennium not 1,000 but 100,000 years. Hindus, more independent than any, never concealed their chronology. Thus, when saying 9,000 years, the initiates will read 900,000 years, during which space of time, that is, from the first appearance of the Aryan race, when the Pliocene portions of the one great Atlantis began gradually sinking and other continents to appear on the surface, down to the final disappearance of Plato's small island of Atlantis, the Aryan races had never ceased to fight with the descendants of the first giant races. Note: the main continent of Atlantis perished in the Miocene times, as already stated. End of note. This war lasted till nearly the close of the age which preceded the Kali Yuga, and was the Mahabharatian war so famous in Indian history. Such blending of the events and epochs, and bringing down of hundreds of thousands into thousands of years, does not interfere with the numbers of years that had elapsed according to the statement made by the Egyptian priests to Solon, since the destruction of the last portion of Atlantis. The 9,000 years were the correct figures given. The latter event has never been kept a secret, and had only faded out of the memory of the Greeks. The Egyptians had their records complete because isolated, for being surrounded by sea and desert, they had been left untrammeled by other nations till about a few millenniums before our era. History for the first time catches a glimpse of Egypt and its great mysteries through Herodotus, if we do not take into account the Bible and its queer chronology. Note: from Bede downwards, all the chronologists of the Church have differed among themselves and contradicted each other. The chronology of the Hebrew text has been grossly altered, especially in the interval next after the deluge, says Whiston, Old Testament, page 20. End of note. And how little Herodotus could tell is confessed by himself when speaking of a mysterious tomb of an initiate at Sais, in the sacred precinct of Minerva. There, he says, behind the chapel is the tomb of one, whose name I consider it impious to divulge. In the enclosure stand large obelisks, and there is a lake near, surrounded with a stone wall formed in a circle. In this lake they perform by night that person's adventures, which they call mysteries. On these matters, however, though I am accurately acquainted with the particulars of them, I must observe a discreet silence." Unquote. On the other hand, it is well known that no secret was so well preserved and so sacred with the ancients as that of their cycles and computations. From the Egyptians down to the Jews, it was held as the highest sin to divulge anything pertaining to the correct measure of time. It was for divulging the secrets of the gods that Tantalus was plunged into the infernal regions. The keepers of the sacred Sibylline books were threatened with the death penalty for revealing a word from them. Sigalians, images of Harpocrates, were in every temple, especially in those of Isis and Serapis, each pressing a finger to the lips, while the Hebrews taught that to divulge after initiation into the rabbinical mysteries the secrets of Kabbalah was like eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. It was punishable by death. And yet we Europeans accepted the exoteric chronology of the Jews. What wonder that it has influenced and colored ever since all our conceptions of science and the duration of things. Persian traditions, then, are full of two nations of races, now entirely extinct, as some think, whereas they are only transformed. They are ever speaking of and describing the mountains of Kaf, within brackets Kafaristan, ? Which contain a gallery built by the giant Argiak, wherein the statues of the ancient men under all their forms are preserved. They call them Suleimans, Solomons, or the wise kings of the East, and count 72 kings of that name. Note: thence King Solomon, whose traces are nowhere to be found outside of the Bible, and the description of whose magnificent palace and city dovetail with those of the Persian tales, though they were unknown to all pagan travelers, even to Herodotus. End of note. 3 among them reigned for 1,000 years each, from Hermes, page 829. Siamek, the beloved son of Kaimurat, Adam, their first king, died murdered by his giant brother. The father had a perpetual fire preserved on the tomb which contained his cremated ashes, hence the origin of fire worship, as some Orientalists think. Then came Hushkink, the prudent and the wise. It was his dynasty which rediscovered metals and precious stones, which had been concealed by the devs or giants in the bowels of the earth, how to make brasswork, to cut canals, and improve agriculture. As usual, it is Hushkink again who is credited with having written the work called Eternal Wisdom, and even with having built the cities of Luz, Babylon, and Isfahan, though they were built ages later. But as modern Delhi is built on 6 other older cities, so these just-named cities may be built on emplacements of other cities of an immense antiquity. As to his date, it can only be inferred from another legend. In the same tradition, that wise prince is credited with having made war against the giants on a 12-legged horse, whose birth is attributed to the armors of a crocodile with a female hippopotamus. This dodecaped was found on the dry island or new continent. Much force and cunning had to be used to secure the wonderful animal, but no sooner had Hushkink mounted him than he defeated every enemy. No giants could withstand his tremendous power. Notwithstanding, this king of kings was killed by an enormous rock thrown at him by the giants from the great mountains of Damavend. Note: Oriental Traditions, page 454, and see also Bey's Lettres sur Atlantide. End of note. Tammuz is the 3rd king of Persia, the St. George of Iran, the knight who always has the best of and who kills the dragon. He is the great enemy of the devs who in his day dwelled in the mountains of Kaf and occasionally made raids on the Peris. The old French chronicles of the Persian folklore call him the Dev-Bend, the conqueror of the giants. He too is credited with having founded Babylon, Nineveh, Diyarbek, etc., etc. Like his grandsire Hushkink, Tammuz, or Taimuraz, also had his steed, only far more rare and rapid, a bird called Simurg-Anke, a marvelous bird in truth, intelligent, a polyglot, and even very religious. See Oriental Collections, Volume 2, page 119. What says that Persian phoenix? It complains of its old age, for it is born cycles and cycles before the days of Adam, also Kaimurat. It had witnessed the revolutions of long centuries. It has seen the birth and the close of 12 cycles of 7,000 years each, which multiplied esoterically will give us again 840,000 years. From Oriental Collections, Volume 2, page 119 et sequens. Note: remember that the rabbins teach that there are to be 7 successive renewals of the globe, that each will last 7,000 years, the total duration being thus 49,000 years. See Rabbi Parka's Wheel, also Kinnelly's Book of God, page 176. This refers to 7 rounds, 7 root races, and sub-races, the truly occult figures, though sorely confused. End of note. Simurg is born with the last deluge of the pre-Adamites, says the romance of Simurg and the good Caliph. What says the Book of Numbers? Esoterically, Adam Rishon is the lunar spirit, Jehovah in a sense, or the pt2, and his 3 sons, Cain, Habel, and Seth, represent the 3 races, as already explained. Noah Xisutrus represents in his turn, in the cosmogeological key, the 3rd race separated, and his 3 sons, its last 3 races. Ham, moreover, symbolizing that race which uncovered the nakedness of the parent race and of the mindless, that is, committed sin. Tammuz visits on his winged steed, Ahriman, to the mountains of Korkaf or Kapf. He finds there the Peris ill-treated by the giants, and slays Argen and the giant Demrush. Then he liberates the good Peri, Mergena, whom Demrush had kept as a prisoner, and takes her over to the dry island that is the new continent of Europe. Note, Mergane, or Morgana, the fairy sister of King Arthur, is thus shown of Oriental descent. And note, where we find her indeed in Great Britain, in the romance of the Knights of the Round Table, whence the identity of name and fairyhood, if both heroines did not symbolize the same historical event which had passed into a legend. End of note. After him came Giamshit, who builds Esikekar, or Persepolis. This king reigns 700 years and believes himself in his great pride immortal and demands divine honors. Fate punishes him. He wanders for 100 years in the world under the name of Dulkarnain, the two-horned. But this epithet has no connection with the two-horned gentleman of the cloven foot. The two-horned is the epithet given in Asia, uncivilized enough to know nothing of the attributes of the devil, to those conquerors who have subdued the world from the east to the west. Then come the usurpers Soak and Feridun, one of the Persian heroes, who vanquishes the former and shuts him up in the mountains of Damavend. These are followed by many others, down to Kaikobad, who founded a new dynasty. Such is the legendary history of Persia, and we have to analyze it. What are the mountains of Kaf, to begin with? Whatever they may be in their geographical status, whether they are the Caucasian or Central Asian mountains, it is far beyond these mountains to the north that legend places the Devs and Peris, the latter the remote ancestors of the Parsis or Farsis. Oriental tradition is ever referring to an unknown glacial gloomy sea, and to a dark region within which nevertheless are situated the fortunate islands wherein bubbles from the beginning of life on earth, the fountain of life, from Herbelot, page 593, and Armenian Tales, page 35. But the legend asserts, moreover, that a portion of the first dry island on the continent, having detached itself from the main body, has remained since then beyond the mountains of Kukaf, the stony girdle that surrounds the world. A journey of 7 months' duration will bring him who is possessed of Solomon's ring to that fountain, if he keeps on journeying north straight before him as the bird flies. Journeying, therefore, from Persia straight north will bring one along the 60th degree of longitude, holding to the west to Nova Zembla, and from the Caucasus to the eternal ice beyond the Arctic Circle would land one between 60 and 45 degrees of longitude, or between Nova Zembla and Spitzbergen. This, of course, if one has the dodecapodean horns of Hushink or the winged simorg of Tamurat, or Taimuraz, upon which to cross over the Arctic Ocean. Note: to this day the aborigines of Caucasus speak of their mountains as Kafkas, using the consonant P instead of the usual V, Kavkaz or Caucasus. But their bards say that it requires 7 months for a swift horse to reach the dry land beyond Kaf, holding north without ever deviating from one's way. End of note. Nevertheless, the wandering songsters of Persia and the Caucasus will maintain to this day that far beyond the snow-capped summits of Kap or Caucasus there is a great continent now concealed from all. That it is reached by those who can secure the services of the 12-legged progeny of the crocodile and the female hippopotamus, whose legs become at will 12 wings, or by those who have the patience to wait for the good pleasure of Simorak Anke, who promised that before she dies she will reveal the hidden continent to all, and make it once more visible and within easy reach by means of a bridge, which the ocean devs will build between that portion of the dry island and its severed parts. This relates, of course, to the 7th race, Simorg being the manmanteric cycle. Notes. Note on the 12 wings. Bei thought he saw in this horse a 12-oared ship. The secret doctrine teaches that the early third race built boats and flotillas before it built houses. But the horse, though a much later animal, has nevertheless a more cult primitive meaning. The crocodile and the hippopotamus were held sacred and represented divine symbols, both with the ancient Egyptians and with the Mexicans. Poseidon is, in Homer, the god of the horse, and assumes that form himself to please Ceres. Arion, their progeny, is one of the aspects of that horse, which is a cycle. And note on the dry island and its severed parts. The severed parts must be Norway and other lands in the neighborhood of the Arctic Circle. End of note. It is very curious that Cosmas Indicopleustes, who lived in the 6th century AD, should have always maintained that man was born and dwelt at first in a country beyond the ocean, a proof of which had been given him in India by a learned Caldean. See Cosmas Indicopleustes in Collections Nova Patrum, Volume 2, page 188. And also see Journal du Savant, Supplement 1707, page 20. He says, "The lands we live in are surrounded by the ocean, but beyond that ocean there is another land which touches the walls of the sky. And it is in this land that man was created and lived in paradise. During the deluge, Noah was carried in his ark into the land his posterity now inhabits," from the same source. The 12-legged horse of Hushink was found on that continent, named the Dry Island. Supra, page 554. The Christian topography of Cosmas Indicopleustes and its merits are well known, but here the good father repeats a universal tradition now moreover corroborated by facts. Every Arctic traveler suspects a continent or a dry island beyond the line of eternal ice. Perhaps now the meaning of the following passage from one of the commentaries may become clearer. Quote, "In the first beginnings of human life, the only dry land was on the right end of the sphere, where it, the globe, is motionless." Notes. The two poles are called the right and left ends of our globe, the right being the North Pole, or the head and feet of the Earth. Every beneficent, astral and cosmic action comes from the North, every lethal influence from the South Pole. They are much connected with and influence right and left hand magic. And note, the more one approaches the poles, the less rotation is felt. At the poles proper, the diurnal revolution is quite neutralized. Thence the expression that the sphere is motionless. End of notes. The whole earth was one vast watery desert, and the waters were tepid. There man was born on the 7 zones of the immortal, the indestructible of the Manvantara. Note, it is averred in occultism that the land or island which crowns the North Pole like a skull cap is the only one which prevails during the whole Manvantara of our round. All the central continents and lands will emerge from the sea bottom many times in turn, but this land will never change. End of note. There was eternal spring in darkness, but that which is darkness to the man of today was light to the man of his dawn. There the gods rested, and Forhat reigns ever since. Note, bear in mind that the Vedic and Avestian name of Forhat is Apam Napat. In the Avesta he stands between the fire Yajdas and the water Yajdas. The literal meaning is son of the waters, but these waters are not the liquid we know, but ether, the fiery waters of space. Forhat is the son of ether in its highest aspect, Akasha, the mother-father of the primitive 7 and of sound, or logos. Forhat is the light of the latter. See Book 1. End of note. Thus the wise fathers say that man is born in the head of his mother, Earth, and that her feet are at the left end generated, begot, the evil winds that blow from the mouth of the lower dragon. Between the first and second races, the eternal central land was divided by the water of life. Note: this water is the blood or fluid of life which animates the earth, compared here to a living body. End of note. It flows around and animates her, Mother Earth's body. Its one end issues from her head. It becomes foul at her feet, the southern pole. It gets purified on its return to her heart, which beats under the foot of the sacred Shambhala, which then in the beginnings was not yet born. For it is in the belt of man's dwelling, the earth, that lies concealed the life and health of all that lives and breathes. Note: occult teaching corroborates the popular tradition which asserts the existence of a fountain of life in the bowels of the earth and in the North Pole. It is the blood of the earth, the electromagnetic current, which circulates through all the arteries, and which is said to be found stored in the navel of the earth. End of note. During the first and second races, the belt was covered with the great waters, but the Great Mother travailed under the waves, and a new land was joined to the first one, which our wise men call the headgear, the cap. She travailed harder for the third race, and her waist and navel appeared above the water. It was the belt, the sacred Himavat, which stretches around the world. Note: occultism points to the Himalayan chain as that belt, and maintains that, whether under the water or above, it encircles the globe. The navel is described as situated to the setting sun, or to the west of the Himavat, in which lie the roots of Meru, which mountain is north of the Himalaya. Meru is not the fabulous mountain in the navel or center of the earth, but its roots and foundations are in that navel, though it is in the far north itself. This connects it with the central land that never perishes, the land in which the day of the mortal lasts 6 months, and his night another 6 months. As the Vishnu Purana has it, for the north of Meru there is therefore always night during day in other regions, for Meru is north of all the Dvipas and Varshas, islands and countries. See Book 2, Chapter 8. Meru is therefore neither on Atlas, as Wilford suggests, nor, as Wilson tried to show, absolutely in the center of the globe, only because relatively with inhabitants of the several portions, to all of whom the east is that quarter where the sun first appears." Unquote. End of note. She broke toward the setting sun from her neck downward to the southwest, into many lands and islands, but the eternal land, the cap, broke not asunder. Note: even the commentaries do not refrain from oriental metaphor. The globe is likened to the body of a woman, Mother Earth. From her neck downward means from the inland sea now beyond the impassable barrier of ice. The earth, as Parasara says, is the mother and nurse, augmented with all creatures and their qualities, the comprehender of all the worlds. Unquote. End of note. Dry lands covered the face of the silent waters to the four sides of the world. All these perished in their turn. Then appeared the abode of the wicked, the Atlantis. The eternal land was now hid, for the waters became solid, frozen, under the breath of her nostrils and the evil winds from the dragon's mouth, etc., etc. This shows that Northern Asia is as old as the second race. One may even say that Asia is contemporary with man, since from the very beginnings of human life its root continent, so to speak, already existed, that part of the world now known as Asia being only cut off from it in a later age and divided by the glacial waters. If then the teaching is understood correctly, the first continent which came into existence capped over the whole North Pole like one unbroken crust, and remains so to this day, beyond that inland sea which deemed like an unreachable mirage to the few Arctic travelers who perceived it. During the second race, more land emerged from under the waters as a continuation of the head from the neck, beginning on both hemispheres, on the line above the most northern part of Spitsbergen. On Mercator's projection on our side, it may have included, on the American side, the localities that are now occupied by Baffin's Bay and the neighboring islands and promontories. Note: for the stanzas called this locality by a term translated in the commentary as a place of no latitude, Niraksha, the abode of the gods. As a scholiast says from the Surya Siddhanta, above this, the Siddha, goes the sun when situated at the equinoxes. They have neither equinoctial shadow nor elevation of the pole. Akshonati, verse 42. In both directions from these are two pole stars, Dhruvatara, fixed in the midst of the sky. To those who are situated in places of no latitude, Niraksha, both these have their place in the horizon. Hence there is, on that land, no elevation of the poles, the two pole stars being situated in their horizon, but their degrees of equilatitude, Lumbaka, are 90. At Meru, the degrees of latitude, Aksha, are of the same number. Unquote, from 43 and 44. End of note. There it hardly reached, southward, the 70th degree of latitude. Here it formed the horseshoe continent of which the commentary speaks, of the two ends of which one included Greenland with their prolongation which crossed the 50th degree a little southwest, and the other Kamchatka, the two ends being united by what is now the northern fringe of the coasts of eastern and western Siberia. This broke asunder and disappeared. In the early part of the third race, Lemuria was formed, Vidisupra. When it was destroyed in its turn, Atlantis appeared. Western speculations founded on the Greek and Puranic traditions. Thus it becomes natural to find that on even such meager data as have reached the profane historian, Rudbeck, a Swedish scientist, tried to prove about 2 centuries ago that Sweden was the Atlantis of Plato. He thought even that he had found in the configuration of ancient Uppsala the situation and measurements given by the Greek sage of the capital of, quote, Atlantis, unquote. As B proved, Rudbeck was mistaken, but so was B likewise, and still more. For Sweden and Norway had formed part and parcel of ancient Lemuria, and also Atlantis on the European side, just as eastern and western Siberia and Kamchatka had belonged to it on the Asiatic. Only once more, when was it? We can find it out approximately only by studying the Puranas, if we will have naught to do with the secret teachings. 3/4 of a century have already elapsed since Captain, now Colonel, Wilford brought forward his fanciful theories about the British Islands being the White Island, the Atala of the Puranas. This was sheer nonsense, as the Atala is one of the 7 Dvipas or islands belonging to the Netherlocus, one of the 7 regions of Patala, the Antipodes. Moreover, as Wilford shows, the Puranas place it on the 7th zone or 7th climate, rather on the 7th measure of heat, which thus locates it between the latitudes of 24 and 28 degrees north. Note on Wilford. Wilford makes many mistakes. He identifies, for instance, Svetadvipa, the White Island, the island in the northern part of Toyambuti, with England, and then tries to identify it with Atala, a nether region, and Atlantis. Now the former is the abode of Vishnu exoterically, and Atala is a hell. He also places it in the Euxine or Ikshu, Black Sea, and then seems to connect it in another place with Africa and Atlas. End of note. It is then to be sought on the same degree as the Tropic of Cancer, whereas England is between the 50th and 60th degrees of latitude. Wilford speaks of it as Atala, Atlantis, the White Island. And in Volume 8 of Journal of Asiatic Researches, page 280, its enemy is called the White Devil, the demon of terror. For he says, quote, "In there, the Hindu and Mohammedan romances, we see cows going to the mountain of Ashburi, at the foot of which the sun sets, to fight the Dev-Sephid, or White Devil, the Tara-Daitya of the Puranas, whose abode was on the seventh stage of the world, answering to the seventh zone of the Buddhists, or the White Island." Unquote. Now, here the Orientalists have been and are still facing the Sphinx riddle, the wrong solution of which will ever destroy their authority, if not their persons, in the eyes of every Hindu scholar, even those who are not initiates. For there is not a statement in the Puranas on the conflicting details of which Wilford based his speculations, which has not several meanings, and does not apply to both the physical and the metaphysical worlds. If the old Hindus divided the face of the globe geographically into 7 zones, climates, dvipas, and into 7 hells and 7 heavens, allegorically, that measure of 7 did not apply in both cases to the same localities. It is the North Pole, the country of Meru, which is the 7th division, as it answers to the 7th principle, or 4th metaphysically, of the occult calculation, for it represents the region of Atma, of pure soul and spirituality. Hence, Pushkara is shown as the 7th zone or Dvipa, which encompasses the Kshira ocean, or ocean of milk, the ever-frozen white region, in the Vishnu and other Puranas. Book 2, Chapter 4. And Pushkara, with its 2 Varshas, lies directly at the foot of Meru, for it is said that the 2 countries north and south of Meru are shaped like a bow, and that 1/2 of the surface of the earth is on the south of Meru, and the other half on the north of Meru, beyond which is half of Pushkara. From Vishnu Purana, Asiatic Researches, etc. Geographically, then, Pushkara is America, northern and southern, and allegorically it is the prolongation of Jambudvipa, in the middle of which stands Meru, for it is the country inhabited by beings who live 10,000 years, who are free from sickening or failing, where there is neither virtue nor vice, caste or laws, for these men are of the same nature as the gods. Vishnu Purana, Book 2, Chapter 4. Note on Jambudvipa. Every name in the Puranas has to be examined at least under 2 aspects, geographically and metaphysically in its allegorical application. For example, Nila, the Blue Mountain, which is one of the boundaries to the north of Meru, is again to be sought geographically in a mountain range in Orissa, and again in a mountain quite different from the others, in Western Africa. Jambudvipa is Vishnu's dominion, the world limited in the Puranas to our globe, the region which contains Meru only, and again it is divided to contain Bharatavarsha, India, its best division, and the fairest, says Parasara. Likewise with Pushkara and all others, end of note. Wilford is inclined to see Meru in Mount Atlas and locates there also the Lokalokas. Now Meru, we are told, which is the Svarloka, the abode of Brahma, of Vishnu, and the Olympus of Indian exoteric religions, is described geographically as passing through the middle of the earth globe and protruding on either side. Surya Siddhanta, verse 5, Witness translation. On its upper station are the gods, on the nether, or south pole, is the abode of demons, hells. How can then Meru be Mount Atlas? Besides which, Tara-Daitya, a demon, cannot be placed on the 7th zone if the latter is identified with the White Island, which is Svetadvipa, for reasons given in the footnote, vide info. Wilford accuses the modern Brahmans of having jumbled them, islands and countries, all together, but he jumbles them still more. He believes that, as the Brahmanda and Vayu Puranas divide the old continent into 7 dvipas, said to be surrounded by a vast ocean, beyond which lie the regions and mountains of Atala. Hence, most probably the Greeks divided the nation of Atlantis, which, as it could not be found after having once been discovered, they conceived to have been destroyed by some shock of nature. Finding certain difficulties in believing that the Egyptian priests, Plato, and even Homer had all built their notions of Atlantis on Attala, another region located at the southern pole, we prefer holding to the statements given in the secret books. We believe in the 7, quote, continents, unquote, 4 of which have already lived their day, the 5th still exists, and 2 are to appear in the future. We believe that each of these is not strictly a continent in the modern sense of the word, but that each name, from Jambu down to Pushkara, refers to the geographical names given, 1. to the dry lands covering the face of the whole earth during the period of a root race in general, and 2. to what remained of these after a geological race pralaya, as Jambu, for instance, and 3. to those localities which will enter after the future cataclysms into the formation of new universal, quote, continents, unquote, peninsulas or dvipas, each continent being in one sense a greater or smaller region of dry land surrounded with water. Note, from Jambu down to Pushkara: Jambu, Plaksha, Salmali, Kusha, Krauncha, Saka, and Pushkara. End of note. A note on the formation of new universal continents, peninsulas, or dvipas, such as Shaka or Pushkara, for instance, which do not yet exist, but into which will enter such lands as some portions of America or Africa and Central Asia, with the Gobi region. Let us bear in mind that Upadvipas means root islands, or the dry land in general. End of notes. Thus, that whatever, quote, jumble, unquote, the nomenclature of these may represent to the profane, there is none in fact to him who has the key. Thus we know that though 2 of the Puranic, quote, islands, unquote, the 6th and 7th, quote, continents, unquote, are yet to come, nevertheless there were or there are lands which will enter into the composition of the future dry lands of new earths whose geographical faces will be entirely changed, as were those of the past. Therefore we find in the Puranas that Sakadvipa is or will be a continent, and that Sankadvipa, as shown in the Vayu Purana, is only a minor island, one of the 9 divisions, to which Vayu adds 6 more, of Bharatavarsha. Because Sankadvipa was peopled by Mlechas, unclean foreigners, who worshipped Hindu divinities, therefore they were connected with India. Note, they were called demons, asuras, giants and monsters because of their wickedness, and thus their country was likened to Attala, a hell because of that. End of note. This accounts for Sankashura, a king of a portion of Sankadvipa, who was killed by Krishna. That king who resided in the palace which was an ocean shell, and whose subjects lived in shells also, says Wilford. Quote, on the banks of the Nile, within brackets question mark, there were frequent contests between the Devatas, divine beings, demigods, and the Daityas, giants, but the latter tribe having prevailed, their king, Sankashura, who resided in the ocean, made frequent incursions in the night. Unquote. Asiatic Researches, from Volume 3, 225. Note, not on the river Nile, surely, but near the Nila mountains of the Atlas range. End of note. It is not on the banks of the Nile, but on the coasts of Western Africa, south of where now lies Morocco, that these battles took place. There was a time when the whole of the Sahara Desert was a sea, then a continent as fertile as the delta, and then, only after another temporary submersion, it became a desert similar to that other wilderness, the desert of Shamu or Gobi. This is shown in Puranic tradition, for on the same page as above cited it is said, the people were between two fires, for while Sankashura was ravaging one side of the continent, Krauncha, or Krakacha, king of Kraunch, used to desolate the other. Both armies thus changed the most fertile regions into a savage desert. That not only the lost island of Atlantis, spoken of by Plato, but a large continent first divided and then broken later into 7 peninsulas and islands called Dvipas, preceded Europe is sure. It covered the whole of the North and South Atlantic regions, as well as portions of the North and South Pacific, and had islands even in the Indian Ocean, relics of Lemuria. The claim is corroborated by Indian Puranas, Greek writers, and Asiatic, Persian, and Mahomedan traditions. Wilford, who confuses sorely the Hindu and the Mussulman legends, shows this, however, clearly. See volume 8, 10, and 11 of Asiatic Researches. And his facts and quotations from the Puranas give direct and conclusive evidence that the Aryan Hindus and other ancient nations were earlier navigators than the Phoenicians, who are now credited with having been the first seamen that appeared in the post-Diluvian times. This is what given in the Journal of the Asiatic Society, Volume 3, pages 325 et sequens. Quote, "In their distress, the few nations who survived in the war between Devatas and Daityas raised their hands to Bhagavan. Let him who can deliver us be our king," using the word it, a magic term not understood by Wilford evidently, which re-echoed through the whole century. Unquote. Then comes a violent storm. The waters of the Kali are strangely agitated. Quote, "When there appeared from the waves a man afterwards called it, at the head of a numerous army, saying, 'Abyan, no fear,' unquote, and scattered the enemy. The king it, explains Wilford, is a subordinate incarnation of Mrida, a form of Rudra, probably, who re-established peace and prosperity throughout all Shankadvipa, through Barbaradesa, Hisantan, and Avastan, or Arabia, etc., etc. Surely, if the Hindu Puranas give a description of wars on continents and islands situated beyond Western Africa in the Atlantic Ocean, if their writers speak of Barbaras and other peoples such as Arabs, they who were never known to navigate or cross the Kalapani, the black waters of the ocean, in the days of Phoenician navigation, then their Puranas must be older than those Phoenicians placed at from 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ. At any rate, those traditions must have been older, as, quote, "in the above accounts," writes an adept, "the Hindus speak of this island as existing and in great power. It must therefore have been more than 11,000 years ago," unquote. Note, says Wilford of the division on Atlantis of Bharat and India, confusing the two accounts, and Priyavrata and Medhatiti. Quote, "The division was made by Priyavrata. He had 10 sons, and it was his intention to divide the whole world. In the same manner Neptune divided Atlantis between his 10 sons. One of them had the extremity of the Atlantis, which is probably the old continent. This Atlantis was overwhelmed by a flood, and it seems that by Atlantis we should understand the antediluvian earth, over which 10 princes were born to rule according to the mythology of the West, and of the East also, but 7 only of them sat upon the throne." Unquote, from Volume 3, page 286. Some also are of opinion that of the 7 Dvipas, 6 were destroyed by a flood. Volume 8, page 367. Wilford takes it to be Gades, which included Spain, but it was Plato's island, rather. End of note. But another calculation and proof may be adduced of the great antiquity of these Hindu Aryans, who knew of, because they had once dwelt in it, and described the last surviving island of Atlantis, or rather of that remnant of the eastern portion of that continent which had perished soon after the upheaval of the 2 Americas, the 2 Varshas of Pushkara. Note on America. America, the, quote, "new," unquote, world, is thus, though not much older, Still it is older than Europe, the Old World. End of note. This may be demonstrated, moreover, on an astronomical calculation by an adept who criticizes Wilford for recalling what the Orientalist had brought forward concerning the Mount Ashbury, at the foot of which the sun sets. Where was the war between the Devatas and the Daityas? He says, "We will consider then the latitude and longitude of the lost island and of the remaining Mount Ashbury. It was on the 7th stage of the world, that is, in the 7th climate, which is between the latitude of 24 degrees and latitude 28 degrees north. This island, the daughter of the ocean, is frequently described as lying in the west, and the sun is represented as setting at the foot of its mountain, Ashbury, Atlas, Tenerife, or Nila, no matter the name, and fighting the white devil of the white island." Note on the Devatas and the Daityas. If Dev or Devsephids, the Tara Daityas, abode was on the 7th stage, it is because he came from Pushkara, the Patala antipodes of India, or from America. The latter touched the walls, so to say, of Atlantis, before the latter sank finally. The word Patala, meaning both the antipodal countries and infernal regions, thus became synonymous in ideas and attributes, as well as in name. End of note. Now, considering this statement from its astronomical aspect, and knowing that Krishna is the incarnated Sun, Vishnu, or solar god, and that he is said to have killed Devsephid, the white giant, a possible personification of the ancient inhabitants at the foot of the Atlas, perchance Krishna may be only a representation of the vertical beams of the sun. Those inhabitants, the Atlantids, are, we have seen, accused by Diodorus of daily cursing the sun and ever fighting his influence. This is an astronomical interpretation, of course, but it will now be proved that Sankashura and Shankadvipa and all their history is also geographically and ethnologically Plato's Atlantis in Hindu dress. It was just remarked that since, in the Puranic accounts, the island is still existing, then those accounts must be older than the 11,000 years elapsed since Sankadvipa, or the Poseidonis of Atlantis, disappeared. Is it not barely possible that Hindus should have known the islands still earlier? Let us turn again to astronomical demonstrations, which make this quite plain if one assumes, according to the said adept, that at the time when the summer tropical color passed through the Pleiades, when Corleones would be upon the equator, and when Leo was vertical to Ceylon at sunset, then would Taurus be vertical to the island of Atlantis at noon. This explains perhaps why the Sinhalese, the heirs of the Rakshasas and giants of Lanka, and the direct descendants of Singha, or Leo, became connected with the Sankadvipa, or Poseidonis, Plato's Atlantis. Only as shown by Mackey's Sphinxiad, this must have occurred about 23,000 years ago astronomically, at which time the obliquity of the ecliptic must have been rather more than 27 degrees, and consequently Taurus must have passed over, quote, Atlantis, or, quote, Sankadvipa, and that it was so is clearly demonstrated. The sacred bull Nandi was brought from Bharata to Sankha to meet Rishabha, Taurus, every kalpa. But when those of the White Island, who descended originally from the Svetadvipa, who had mixed with the Daityas, giants of the land of iniquity, had become black with sin, then Nandi remained forever in the White Island, or Svetadvipa. Those of the fourth world race lost Om, says the commentaries. Note, neither Atlantis nor yet Sankadvipa was ever called White Island. When tradition says that the White Island became black on account of the sins of people, it only means the denizens of the White Island, or Siddhapura, or Svetadvipa, who descended to the Atlantis of the third and fourth races to inform the latter, and who, having incarnated, became black with sin, a figure of speech. All the avatars of Vishnu are said to come originally from the White Island. According to a Tibetan tradition, the White Island is the only locality which escapes the general fate of other Dvipas and can be destroyed by neither fire nor water, for it is the, quote, eternal land, unquote. End of note. Asburj, or Asburj, whether the peak of Tenerife or not, was a volcano when the sinking of the western Attala, or hell, began, and those who were saved told the tale to their children. Plated Atlantis perished between water below and fire above, the great mountain vomiting flames all the while. The fire-vomiting monster survived alone out of the ruins of the unfortunate island. Do the Greeks, accused of borrowing a Hindu fiction, Attala, and inventing from it another, Atlantis, stand also accused of getting their geographical notions and the number 7 from them? Read in Part 2 the several sections on the septenate in nature. The famous Atlantis exists no longer, but we can hardly doubt that it did once, says Proclus, for Marcellus, who wrote a history of Ethiopian affairs, says that such and so great an island once existed, and this is evidenced by those who composed histories relative to the external sea. For they relate that in this time there were 7 islands in the Atlantic Sea sacred to Proserpine, and besides these, 3 of immense magnitude sacred to Pluto, Jupiter, and Neptune. And besides this, the inhabitants of the last island, Poseidonis, preserved the memory of the prodigious magnitude of the Atlantic island as related by their ancestors, and of its governing for many periods all the islands in the Atlantic Sea. From this isle one may pass to other large islands beyond, which are not far from the firm land, near which is the true sea. These 7 Dvipas, inaccurately rendered islands, constitute, according to Marcellus, the body of the famous Atlantis, writes Wilford himself. This evidently shows that Atlantis is the old continent. The Atlantis was destroyed after a violent storm, within brackets, question mark. This is well known to the Puranics, some of whom assert that in consequence of this dreadful convulsion of nature, 6 of the Dvipas disappeared. And quote from chapter 11, page 27. Enough proofs have now been given to satisfy the greatest skeptic. Nevertheless, direct proofs based on exact science are also added. Volumes might be written, however, to no purpose for those who will neither see nor hear, except through the eyes and ears of their respective authorities. Hence the teaching of the Roman Catholic scholiasts, namely that Hermes, the mount in the land of Mishpet, meaning anathema, destruction, is the same as Mount Armon. As a proof of this, Josephus is often quoted, as affirming that still in his own day enormous bones of giants were daily discovered on it. But it was the land of Balaam the prophet, whom the Lord loved well, and so mixed up are facts and personages in the said scholiast's brains that when the Zohar explains the, quote, birds, unquote, which inspired Balaam to mean serpents, to wit, the wise men and adepts at whose school he had learned the mysteries of prophecy, the opportunity is again taken of showing Mount Hermon inhabited by the winged dragons of evil, whose chief is Samiel, the Jewish Satan. Quote, it is to those unclean spirits chained on Mount Hermon of the desert that the scapegoat of Israel, who assumed the name of one of them, Azaziel, was sent, unquote, from Spencer. We say it is not so. The Zohar has the following explanation on the practice of magic, which is called in Hebrew Nechashkim, or the serpent's works. It says in part 3, 302, Nechashkim, because the magicians, practical Kabbalists, work surrounded by the light of the primordial serpent, which they perceive in heaven as a luminous zone composed of myriads of small stars, which means simply the astral light, so called by the Martinists, by Eliphas Levi, and now by all the modern occultists. Vivisections about. Next up, we continue the 12th stanza with the curse from a philosophical point of view.